So as Tracy mentioned, my name's Kevin Lehtiniitty. I've been in the crypto space for about 5 years now, and have been in fintech, the rest of my career. I currently serve as the chief strategy officer for Prime Trust, which is a Nevada state chartered trust company. We're a financial institution here in the U.S. in the crypto space, like a Paxos, BitGo, some other trust companies here in the U.S. that are in the space. I'm also the co-founder at a startup called Bank, and I'm also the host of a new show that's airing January 8th called Building Blocks, which is all about fintech education, blockchain 101, things like that. And at Prime Trust, I should mention, prior to becoming chief strategy officer, I've also been chief product officer, I've been chief technology officer. I've worn a lot of hats over the last 5 years, so I can speak a lot to the history of being a custodian in the space, how the space has evolved from our perspective, things of that nature. What I'm asked, probably most often is kind of why have I decided to professionally dedicate myself to the crypto space, right? Why is that what Prime Trust does? Why is that what I do? And why does it really matter to the broader world? And I think this is an interesting question that's becoming more and more relevant every day as we get more media attention into the space and we get more adoption from a broader audience. That's really what people are looking at. And for me, it really boils down to kind of three different things. I'm definitely a libertarian at heart. So the first thing for me is always self-sovereignty, right? Having the ability to actually control keys, to actually control assets, and not be bringing them to other places where you no longer have the final say in what they do. You're able to actually own that asset. You're able to control it. No one can tell you how you can spend it. That matters a lot to me as a libertarian. But then the other, which I think is more interesting to the broader audience, is that crypto kind of allows for access to a whole different set of financial products, right? We can start to have fractionalized assets, whether they be fiat currencies through stable coins, whether they be, securities that are traded on the New York Stock Exchange, for example. Right, crypto as an asset class has a really interesting possibility with the level of precision that exists. And you can really start to wrap assets, you can start to fractionalize that ownership. And maybe now I don't have to buy a full share of Berkshire Hathaway for a ton of money. I can buy, 0.001 shares or things like that. I think when you look at stocks and you look at real estate and you look at larger investment projects, that's a really interesting thing of why crypto matters. You can also get into some really interesting things like asset-backed lending, right? Traditionally, for financial institutions and for other folks, asset-backed lending is really hard to do on the fly because you need to kind of value the assets that you're backing. And if it's not a public security, there's not really a liquidity option for these asset-backed loans. But now all of a sudden, through crypto, we basically see this brand new kind of industry. It's around, the liquidity pools and around DeFi and basically being able to say, hey, I'm going to lock up some Bitcoin. I'm going to take a loan against that collateral that I'm putting up, and I'm going to go then spend, these funds that I got as a loan. And meanwhile, the asset that's collateralizing it is rising, right? All of that happens because you have these 24/7 markets. And then lastly, things like staking just didn't exist before blockchain. So, I know that's kind of a long-winded answer. But I think it's important to kind of set the stage. And I know no one really wants to listen to me talk about new financial products. You want to hear about Prime Trust and other things, which I'll get to. But I think it's important for people to understand why we do the things that we do, and why this industry exists, and why I and the folks here at Prime Trust and at Bank and at Building Blocks are all really passionate about the space. Finally, kind of the globalized asset classes. There's very little assets that you can actually use to move value globally, let alone 24/7, let alone almost instantaneously. So to me, that's why crypto matters. And let me talk a little bit about the ecosystem that we've built and how you can build in blockchain, because I know that's something that's often misunderstood or difficult to understand. Really what we did is we started by building Prime Trust, right? And I'll kind of go into the broader strategy. But for those of you that are unfamiliar with Prime Trust flagship product is something called Prime Core. And we really view Prime Core as financial infrastructure. We like to say that we're the AWS, but for fintech apps. And the reason we say that is because just like you don't really, host a server in the closet at the office anymore. You deploy things now to the cloud, whether it's AWS or Google Cloud or something else. We want to do the same, and we are doing the same for the fintech space. So Prime Core is basically an API or a set of infrastructure, and it covers 7 different pieces. It covers custody, whether it's fiat or digital assets. It covers payment rails, cards, wires, APIs for all sorts of payment processing. It covers liquidity, the buying of selling of Bitcoin, buying and selling of other crypto, buying and selling of fractional shares. It covers debit card issuance, that you can go and spend that crypto on a debit card wherever MasterCard's accepted. It covers indemnity, because fraud and chargeback risk are huge when you're processing retail rails, right? So you want to be able to process credit cards with indemnification against chargebacks down the road. We have a 24/7 kind of settlement engine for USD and crypto off-chain in the dark pool. And then, of course, this is all wrapped around our compliance program and our US regulatory license. And this really is intended for anybody building fintech applications. And as we looked at the role of a custodian, I think what led us to build this, and what we realized kind of early on, is that being a custodian in and of itself isn't actually that interesting, right? What's kind of the end goal? And the end goal is to foster the adoption of crypto and blockchain. And how can we best do that as a custodian? Is it by holding on to some Bitcoin or TRX or whatever the asset is? And the answer is no. Actually, holding on to crypto isn't a very interesting problem. It's what is everything else that we can enable with kind of our regulatory positioning, and what technology can we deploy out into the market. That's what people are really interested in. And I think once we started to think of a custodian as a technology infrastructure, now all of a sudden kind of our entire process changed, right? And Prime Core is now the infrastructure that powers Binance US, Bittrex, OKCoin, stablecoins like TrueUSD, crypto on-ramps like Swan, right? This infrastructure is used by a ton of different projects and companies, from small startups in the garage to enterprises like Binance. And that, to me, is a lot more interesting, right? When you can take these 7 pieces, you can build almost anything that you want on top of these 7 pieces. If you're building an exchange, you can use the payment rails, you could use the liquidity, you can use the custody, and you can use the settlement. And now what you have is an exchange that you can deploy to the market really quickly, right? Taking that role of a custodian and actually basically giving more fundamental tools and infrastructure. That's what we've been trying to do with Prime Trust. And we think that's what is really important going into the next 12 months, 24 months, 36 months. The role of a custodian isn't actually to really be a custodian anymore, right? It's to give these Lego pieces. It's to give these plug and play different capabilities and different functionality that lets people get products to market quickly, that lets people innovate, and that basically enables this other generation of fintech applications to be built on top of us. That's kind of our enterprise play. And then, of course, we're not happy with just one thing, right? We're trying to really push the industry forward in a lot of ways. So what we say is, if you're trying to build a fintech application, whether it be an exchange or anything else, you should build on top of Prime Core, right? You should talk to Prime Trust. You should come talk to us. And we can provide you with a lot of technology, a lot of kind of regulatory positioning, and a lot of services that can help you get to market quickly. But now, what if you're a consumer? That doesn't really help a consumer. Or what if you're a fintech application that's looking for a user base, right? So take, for example, something like crypto payments. Crypto payments is traditionally, kind of something that's difficult to do in the US. BitPay obviously services the space. And that's kind of it. So if you're an application and you're trying to get basically your users to be able to pay via crypto, or you're trying to interact with end users, you have some issues. And that's where we're trying to come at the market from 2 different places. And that's actually where we introduced a concept called Bank. And Bank is it's a mobile application. The beta is live in the app stores and the Google Play stores. But the view for Bank is to be the consumer application, right? So Bank is going to allow in future iterations for people to hold digital currencies in their wallets. You can deposit Bitcoin, Ethereum, Tron-based assets, whatever crypto assets you want to hold. And then we're going to make it really easy for people to get in and out of those assets. So we can bring a whole nother wave of people into the crypto space. And we're also going to make it really easy for people to then spend that crypto, basically at any merchant that they want, right? That to me is an interesting combination. You have Prime Trust as a custodian, creating infrastructure for other applications to build on top of. And then you have Bank as a consumer application, serving as an on-ramp and serving as an entry point into crypto. And that means that now basically our goal is for people in the space to stop fighting each other for market share, right? When an exchange pops up right now, at least my perception, is that a lot of it is trying to basically pull users from the other exchange, right? It's exchange competing against exchange for kind of a set user base. And it's a lot less about, bringing new people who aren't yet in crypto into crypto. And that's a much harder problem to solve. But we fundamentally believe that by being able to service kind of the enterprise space and to enable more interesting applications to be built, while at the same time creating kind of a retail and a consumer experience to increase the total size of the space, that we're able to tackle this problem from both sides. And then, when you look at DeFi projects and things like that, they all need a user base, right? They're all intimidating. A lot of people who are new to crypto aren't sophisticated enough to really get into DeFi projects. Those are all things that we can leverage Bank to try to tackle and try to get people into. And then kind of lastly, the third important piece for us is education, right? We're big believers in increasing the size of the crypto industry, getting new users into crypto, getting people to buy their first blockchain-based assets, getting people to really engage and understand in what is crypto, what is blockchain, what are we all doing here? Everybody that's talking today and everybody that's kind of listening here is listening because they're interested in crypto. So how do we get them into the space? How do we increase that? And for us, that's all about education. And that's why we've recently decided that we're going to start a show. I don't want to call it a podcast because there's a video component, but we're going to start a show called Building Blocks. And Building Blocks is streaming on YouTube and lots of other fun places. And that's all about blockchain education. And it's all about getting more consumers into the space. So when we think about at a high level, how do you build the future, right? How do you take the blockchain industry from where it is today to something that's completely mainstream and that's used everywhere, that's ubiquitous, right? Think of the internet in the 90s versus the internet now. How do you take the blockchain platforms and that technology and you make that giant leap? For us, we're trying to hit it from every angle. We're trying to support it from the enterprise side with Prime Trust, Prime Core, taking the custodian, making it a complete infrastructure platform to get new projects out quickly, get them to market kind of in a compliant manner, in a safe manner. We're trying to increase the consumer user base by leveraging Bank, by creating kind of that easy on-off ramp, that way to get into the industry. And then we're going to try to hit it from an educational angle as well and try to educate people on what is crypto, what are these new assets that you can get, why is self-sovereignty important, and why is all the work that we're doing here important. And I think in a nutshell, that's kind of an introduction to what we're doing here more broadly at Prime. And if any of those things are obviously interesting to anybody out there, we'd be happy to hear from you. We're always excited to support new infrastructure from Prime Trust and have more apps and things built on top of us. And then we're also excited to be able to bring a user base to more people, right? By integrating paying with Bank and things like that. I think in a nutshell, I know that's a long-winded answer to kind of what does a custodian look like in the future? I think the short answer is it doesn't actually look like a custodian at all. It looks like a technology services provider. But that's hopefully as much of an introduction as I can fit in 10 or 15 minutes and a little bit of a preview into what we're building here and how we think that impacts the future.